Ready to go? Life is good.
Martin, how are you doing?
Doing great, thanks. Doing absolutely great.
Hi, thanks for joining today.
Stay up here.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are tuning in from. I'm your host, Mohan Kumar Saraswatipura, an IBM Gold Consultant, IBM Champion, and a published author. I'm here with my co-host, Martin Hubel. Hi, Martin. How are you doing?
Doing great. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for joining. Welcome to episode 265, What's New with the Db2 12.1, a powerful database engine available in the world, right? And we have special guest today, Mike Springgay, Db2 Chief Architect from IBM Toronto Lab. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for spending time with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you. So let's go with the get involved. We have a lot of new sessions coming this year. Most of them are going to be from IBM Toronto Lab, and then also a lot of insights from a lot of IDEG presenters. Okay, all the replays are available within YouTube as well as our website, Db2Night Show. And please do join our LinkedIn group to get the communication, and also follow us on X. Disclaimer for you to read for about 10 seconds. All right. Tonight's show, Db2 new feature and improvements in the product. Mike is going to talk about all the features available within 12.1. And we have a lot of upcoming sessions, DB Assistant, Db2 PureScale with Pacemaker, Hyperscaler, reargs on PureScale, Gen AI with Db2. These are all the upcoming sessions. Don't miss any of those. And please look for our communication on our email group, LinkedIn, as well as on the Db2Night Show website. Announcement, DBI performance webinars are conducted primarily for educating people, right? And then we do support SQL Server along with Db2. This product supports for multiple other varieties, right, including the SQL Server, and helps you in tuning the database for much better performance. Thanks for sponsor, DBI, Smart Tools for Smarter People. Move your mouse. We're going to see a couple of questions on your screen. Polling questions. It's going to come on your screen. All right, let me know when you see it. Yep, you see it. We have 20 seconds for each polling questions to address or answer. We are getting answers, responses. Okay, 5 seconds left. Closing the poll and sharing the results. Right, so Db2 11.5.8 and higher is 80%, and we do have people running lower than 5.8, 11.5.8, and 11.1, 10.5, and also some older version of Db2, 9.7 and older, 10%. Mike, what is your advice for people running older databases?
They really should be looking to move up. 9.7 and 10.5 have been, sort of out of support for a long time without fixes. 11.1 will quickly be going fully out of extended support. So getting to 11.5 and 12 is great.
Great.
But I'm happy to see that most people are current on 11.5.
Yes,
running
right.
5 seem to be running on 11.5.8 or 11.5.9, which is really where we want to see people.
Great, exactly. Distributing the next poll question. Are you planning to upgrade to Db2 12.1? If it is yes, wow, okay. Good responses we have. All right, 5 seconds left before closing the poll. Okay, closing the poll, sharing the results. 50% says yes, they're planning to upgrade to 12.1, and about 50% needing to understand 12.1 features before upgrading, and then 13% says they want to stay wherever they are. Okay, that's where we are here. So needed to understand more about 12.1 features and then make a proposal, upgrade the databases. Are you running Db2 pureScale? Okay, mixed reaction or answers. Right, closing the poll, publishing the result. 22% says yeah, they are using pureScale, and 78% no. What are your challenges, environment challenges? Okay. Great, so closing the poll, sharing the result. Right, 36% of people says performance, 18% availability, data growth about 18, and then 27 other. So I think most of the features what we have in 12.1 are going to address performance for sure, right? Availability as well as the data growth, how to place the databases or the archival data in external locations, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these are areas we try to address in every release in Modpack, but I guess I'm a little surprised performance is as high as it is, because it is an area where I think Db2 excels, but there's always room for more improvements.
Right. Okay. Are you running HADR with pacemaker in production? Okay. Closing the poll, sharing the results. Okay, so about 36% yes and no still on the TSA. A couple of them are planning to convert the database from standalone to HADR. Two questions are about the cloud. Are you running Db2 on EC2 or virtual machine in cloud? Okay, gonna close the poll in 3 seconds. Closing the poll, sharing the results. All right, 83% on-prem only, 17% on cloud. Mixed on-prem and cloud. Are you using Db2 RDS in AWS? Okay. Closing the poll, sharing the result. Quite a few users are using RDS, but 92% are no at this point. Okay, that's about the polling questions. We're going to move on to the next. All right, Mike doesn't need an introduction. Mike Springgay, Db2 Chief Architect. and STSM, right? Mike, I'm going to make you as a presenter.
All right.
Please feel to ask questions. Write it in the chat section. I'm going to be monitoring, and so that we can get the answer directly from Mike. Okay. So you should be seeing a pop-up.
Yeah, I got the pop-up. So. Okay, are you seeing correctly?
Oh, yes, it is awesome.
All right. So again, thank you for having me on the show. And I'm going to go through sort of what's new and what's next for Db2. So we'll a little bit of sneak preview at some of the stuff even after 12.1. I guess the first slide is the standard disclaimer. You know, especially when we start talking about things after 12.1, everything's sort of subject to change. I may accidentally misspeak. So keep that in mind. All right. I'd like to put this slide up for a couple of reasons. One to show that, you know, we've delivered a lot of functionality over the 30 plus years of Db2. Some of that functionality, you know, has been in the product for many years, many decades even. And you'll hear sometimes our competitors talk about it as if they're new things. So one thing, you know, we all need to keep in mind in the Db2 community is that just because our competitors are talking sometimes about feature function, you know, doesn't necessarily mean Db2 not talking about it, that we don't have it. You need to go look and make sure that, you know, it is capabilities we've probably delivered in the past. The other reason for this slide is really to convey that we've changed how we deliver Db2. So you know, originally we did big releases every 3 or 2 years, depending on, you know, how the cycle worked. But everything we did kind of came out in GA. We delivered fixed packs. Yes, some little, you know, features may have creeped into fixed packs, but for generally speaking, you're looking at new functionality every 2 to 3 years. With 11.1 and 11.5 in particular, we moved to a mod pack delivery model where we deliver a set of functionality at GA to set us up for what will be the life of the release over, you know, the duration it exists. So, you know, 11.5 had some function, but we delivered new function in every mod pack. So you need to keep that in mind. The functionality will deliver out in a faster pace every, you know, 6 to 9 months, sometimes even a little bit faster at the beginning of releases. And support is now given out, like fixes are delivered through what we call the cumulative special build, which we publish out every 4 to 8 weeks. And you can go grab, you know, the latest CSD for the mod pack to pick up your maintenance, your security fixes as you need those on your own sort of timelines. So just keep in mind, you know, delivery model is slightly different. 12.1 will be no different than 11.5 as we see it evolve. So just a little bit of a recap as we look back on 2024. You know, a lot of our investment was really on Db2 and the hyperscalers. You know, how did we enhance and bring AWS RDS sort of to maturity, as well as, you know, we invested in our own Db2 on cloud, next generation product, learning from some of the work we did with AWS on Db2 for RDS on how to bring Db2 cloud to be a little bit more flexible in that offering. We deliver pureScale as a service in AWS and are looking to bring it out in Azure in 2025. Warehouse on cloud, Gen 3, we brought what we had on AWS. So with 11.5.9, we brought a set of capabilities, what we're calling our Gen 3 offering, where we have object storage support for columnar data and open data format integration. That was delivered with 11.5.9 on AWS. But in 2024, we brought that same offering to IBM Cloud, leveraging the V12 code base to match offerings, but also get our own deliveries out early. Obviously, Gen AI is a big thing right now in the market, and Db2 plays in that space with both the AI optimizer, which we'll talk a bit about later, using Gen AI to help improve our own operations, but also the DB Assistant as part of the console comes out, and I know you'll have a session which will go much deeper on that, but I will talk a little today. To leverage Gen AI in order to help DBAs, better interact with our tooling. And of course, we delivered on 12.1, and that's what we're going to do a lot of sort of a deep dive on the features and functions in a bit. So just want to reiterate that IBM has a partnership with AWS, and Db2 is there in all of our form factors in some form. So Db2 RDS for transactional data is there as a managed service. Db2 Warehouse on Cloud, our own managed service offering for the warehouse products. We provide pureScale in the marketplace. So this is infrastructure as a service. You need to bring the infrastructure and manage it once it's deployed. But it's really a click-through panel type deployment that really removes the complexity of setting up pureScale in those AWS environments. And we have our container technology and therefore have references on how to deploy that container technology out into AWS through, Kubernetes or OpenShift environments running on that platform, if you want to manage everything yourself. In 2025, we continue to focus, on the cloud. So roadmap, evolution for both of our managed services, both on IBM Cloud and AWS, but you'll also see us looking at other hyperscalers, such as maybe Azure, and how we can get our managed services into those environments. We will continue to focus on Gen AI. And one of the big things is to try and overhaul the data management console with a new user experience as we bring that DB Assistant into it for on-premise. And of course, we will continue to deliver on 12.1 with the number of mod packs planned for 2025. So just touch a little bit on the DB Assistant. So this is an offering right now only available in our consoles for our managed services, but you can go there and use the managed services as a way to try it out. It will come on premise in 2025 as we do that revamp of the console. But this really, it provides the ability to leverage sort of a chat interface to interact with, the docs. So it's a very easy way to get information on error codes or other syntax you want. And the nice thing is it's, it's trained on our docs. So, unlike Google, where you might Google something and you get back references from different variations of the product or different, family of the product, this is going to get you hits immediately on the Db2 docs of the version you're running, because that's what it's trained on. You can interact with the monitoring metrics to get graphs and stuff sort of through a natural language without having to remember how to generate those table functions yourself. And as we evolve this, we are looking at how to bring in more advanced analysis and do more root cause or performance sort of checking, at the query level and et cetera. But that's sort of roadmap items to come. I mentioned that, in 2025, the plan is to revise and, bring up the database management console. So, new user design for how it looks and feels, but also new capabilities and integration there with that DB Assistant. So stay tuned, something that will come in 2025. One of the other tools that will come out very soon in the first half of 2025 is the ability to do a data movement tool to help with migrations from, whether you're moving from different targets on premise or if you're moving from on premise into the cloud, just help simplify everything around how to move data around when you're trying to move from one topology to another, as well as help integrate into some of the competitive takeouts like Oracle and Teradata, where we integrate some of the migration services around other aspects than just data movement. But so new tool to help sort of ease transitions of folks who need to move from different deployment factors into others. On the warehousing side,
Mike, can I ask a question for the previous one?
Yeah.
So for the migration tool with enabling high performance unload, is that going to be a licensed product, or is going to be added as part of the engine itself?
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be licensing. Whether or not it's a bundled product where you can maybe pay for a edition of this tool that will have HPU with it, I'm not sure exactly how the offering side of the tooling will
Okay.
come to play. So that's, it's a new tool. It's not yet released. Product management will sort of define all of that. Just because of the fact that HPU is it's a bundled product from
Right.
there will be some sort of cost.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. So on the warehouse offering, we have our traditional appliances on premise. Today, we also have, people using traditional software, variations of DPF environments, and all of those, can stay as they are. But, people are looking how to then move into sort of maybe a different deployment factor for the next step of their warehouse evolution. And just slide is really just showing that, we have an offering available no matter which way you want to go from a deployment factor. Obviously we have our managed services, so that's a way to get into the cloud and remove some of that management aspects from your operations. But if you aren't looking purely for cloud and you want something closer to a self-managed offering, we do have the container technology that I mentioned previously, that can run in either a hyperscaler's OpenShift or Kubernetes environment, or you can run those same OpenShift on-premise and leverage the same technology to run a sort of an on-premise managed warehouse offering. And if you're looking for more of an integrated sort of hardware and software premise, we have what we call our Cloud Rack. This is a P10 offering, which basically bundles a predefined set of hardware that we've tested to a certain performance capability with the Db2 warehouse container technology to provide that one sort of set of offering that has been tested together. And this is just a slide that sort of highlights, the Power 10 Cloud Rack offering, which really is bringing, that flexibility of having a predefined hardware stack that you can sort of pre-tested, pre-assembled, and then running OpenShift with Db2U on top of that, providing all of the high-end capabilities that you would expect from that integrated type of offering. Our container technology continues to evolve and continues to be sort of the basis for most of our cloud forward offerings. So the managed services use our own container technologies. Then, our container technologies is there to run in the hyperscalers on their Kubernetes and OpenShift environments. But we also leverage it in that P10 architecture I was talking about previously. And we continue to evolve, what we provide through the containers, as well as, how it instruments into the OpenShift environment through, higher level operator integration. Some of the capabilities that is, requires pieces to be assembled and work together, such as our open data format offerings, come through the container technology because it can bring those two containers together and orchestrate it all through Kubernetes. All right, so now 12.1. This is really focused on what we've delivered from an engine perspective. Pacemaker is sort of one of the big pushes on the Linux platform. So pureScale and HA, Pacemaker will be our only integrated technology. On AIX, we remain with TSA because that remains the sort of preferred cluster manager on AIX. But in the Linux environment, Pacemaker sort of has become sort of this de facto standard in the Linux community, and we want to integrate and leverage, what makes sense for the operating system. So we have in 12.1 on a Linux only, Pacemaker will be available, and we did the work to make sure it works in pureScale, HADR and DPF environments. One of the big pieces of work we did is also namespace separation, aka tenant. So this is a tenant construct that allows for logical separation, allows you to have, application separation within a database. You can deploy, multiple copies of the application in without having to play games with the schemas, because you can now have the same schema name exist in each of the tenants. But it still operationally is a single database, and you can share memory, share resources, but you have to therefore manage it also as a database entity. We finally GA'd the AI-powered Query Optimizer, we talked about it as sort of the ML optimizer, sort of through 11.5, where it was in tech preview. And this is providing us much better ability to get statistics for very complex plans, and therefore we can see significant query performance. And we'll talk a little bit more on the performance we've seen in a few slides. And of course, generative AI, as I said, so in 12.1, a lot of this comes through the DB Assistant or the AI Optimizer, but as you look through 2025, we're looking to see how we can make DB2 be that database that can be the database for Gen AI applications that need to marry both, vector support and relational data. Backup improvements. So, we brought out inter-tablespace parallelism. So in the past, we could only parallelize across table spaces. If you had a table space that was, skewed much larger than maybe the other table spaces in your database, it was going to be the bottleneck for how long your backups took. With inter-tablespace parallelism, we can now parallelize within that single table space. We obviously parallelize across the table spaces as well, so that we don't degrade anything. But now that large table space will get backed up faster, and therefore is no longer the sort of the longest backup time for your database. Very popular request. We've now delivered driver support on M1, M2, and M3 chips. So we have the driver capable of running on native Mac silicon, allowing better ease of use for people to connect to the database from whatever they happen to use as their development machines or application servers. On the front of trying to move in a direction where we have less downtime during those major release upgrades, we have brought in the ability to leverage read on standby during upgrade processing to at least maintain some availability of the database. So we'll talk a little bit more on that in a couple slides. One of the big themes is security, and we'll talk about a lot of the security things. So pureScale, HAR, SSL, the audit context work is really about trying to make us more secure by default in those environments. Online index reorg was to bring in the same capabilities for pureScale that we have in the other deployment factors, ability to do online index reorgs. Unfortunately, that did not quite make GA, so it will ship in Mod 1, which is coming out very soon, targeting February. So it will be there very soon, but not quite in GA. There's a bunch of the min-move table performance enhancements, some of them leveraging the work we did for schema evolution on columnar tables. So for a min-move table, we can do online table moves now between columnar and columnar because of the schema evolution work, where we leverage the ability to drop columns to use a spare column to track those changes that we would have done through triggers in a more row organized approach. Schema evolution for columnar tables is kind of going to be a theme for the 12, as you see that we come out with drop and rename, and we'll look at other alters that we can incrementally bring in through the mod packs to reduce the differences between row and columnar tables in that space. Federation is a key feature used by lots and lots of customers, and we continue to enhance it, making sure that the most recent data sources, whether they be existing data sources with just new releases or even newer data sources that are sort of coming out into the market, are supported through Federation, and that we continue to look at how to improve what we can do from a pushdown perspective to increase performance. All right, the other big change people need to be aware of is really the OS and platform support. As V12 is a major release, the one thing we do on major releases is we update what we can do from a, what levels of OSs we support by default. And so with that, most of our version releases have moved forward. So Red Hat 9.4 is the minimum for Red Hat, SUSE 15, Service Pack 6, Ubuntu 2022, and AIX 7.3 TL2. One thing you'll notice is on the pureScale side, unfortunately, due to some dependencies between bundled products that we require for pureScale, we weren't able to get SUSE 15 Service Pack 6 for pureScale available at GA time. That will come in Mod 1, which again is coming out very soon in February. And then we will have, all the form factors available at the latest GA levels. And one other thing is that we will be releasing through the CSB of 11.5.9 support for pureScale on Red Hat 9.4 again, in order to allow for those single update systems. All right. Pacemaker. So basically in 11.5, we started on our journey of adding Pacemaker into Linux. We worked on delivering Pacemaker on as a co-packaged offering, so you could choose between TSA or Pacemaker in 11.5 for HADR environments, just as a way for us to get it out there and for people to start learning and adopting it. We already saw from the polls that there's been pretty good adoption in many cases for Pacemaker, which is good to see. With 12.1, it will be the only cluster manager on Linux, so folks will be moved to Pacemaker as part of the upgrade process. On AIX, everything stays the same. You'll still have TSA, and that's the moving forward. The nice thing on Linux is that as we move to this new Pacemaker model for HADR or single node active passive failovers or DPF failovers or pureScale, is we sort of took the two different cluster manager wrappers we had, Db2 Haiku and Db2 Cluster, and we sort of moved them together into a unified Db2 CM utility, allowing people to then use one utility for managing Pacemaker, regardless of which form factor you happen to have deployed, making it much simpler for customers to sort of set up and configure, regardless of whether they're doing HADR, DPF or pureScale. They can just basically use the same utility and more or less the same notions. Obviously, there's slight subtle differences depending on the topology and what you're trying to achieve. But for the most part, you're looking at how to configure and interact with Pacemaker the same across all of the form factors, which is a good improvement. Namespace separation. So namespace separation was introduced, so the ability to do tenants is a way to allow consolidation of sort of application namespaces into a single database without having to use physical databases, which have the the downside of having to partition CPU and memory into those different databases. This allows you to have the same applications in the same overall instance that can share memory and CPU. Maybe WLM is used to control which tenant gets what share of that memory at any given time, but doesn't have to be physically separated out in a more static way. So that's one of the main advantages of what we're trying to achieve with tenants, but it does mean that operationally you're still backing up the whole database and not having that level of granularity for tenants. If we need those sort of backup or some of the operational segregation, then obviously physical databases still exist, and you can leverage those to get full sort of operating segmentation. So the main change for Db2 customers is that they're going to see that there's this concept now of the system tenant. And really, that's just the name we gave to what Db2 always looked like traditionally. If you don't ever create tenants, you're always working in the system tenant, and the system tenant behaves and acts exactly like connecting to a database of Db2 in the past. It just has a name, and obviously some interfaces like monitoring or some of the tools, they take a tenant, and so you may see now system tenant popping up, but that's all it really means is that you're using Db2 as you normally would and are connected into the set of catalogs that exist across the whole database. And all catalog tables exist in the system tenant. If you create tenants, you will now get a tenant And in that tenant, there's a subset of system catalog tables, because now we have duplicated the tenants for sort of user-managed objects like tables and columns and stuff. Those exist in the tenant, but things like buffer pools and table spaces and roles and things like that, they exist only up in the system tenant because those are shared objects. You have the same ability to delegate authorization to a tenant that we provided for schema. So when you did schema authorization, the same sort of authorizations exist at tenant level, allowing you to defer out who manages or uses the tenant. In order to get into a tenant, you have to issue the set tenant statement. There are ways to configure the clients to automatically do that at connect time. So the client will connect and then issue the set tenant so that you connect into a specific tenant. But if you don't issue the set tenant, then you obviously connect to the default system tenant as normal. So AI-powered query optimizer. So this is just a way for us to leverage modeling to get additional statistics understanding. And what we find is we can, those models can get us much better cardinality statistics. Right now we're focused on cardinality than just traditional run stats. And the right-hand side is just sort of showing that, for a set of queries that we had, we saw significant improvement across the board using the AI optimizer because we get much better plans. Some places, the mileage doesn't increase as much. So query 1, there's slight degradation even, but probably not noticeable because it's a pretty fast query to begin with. So whether or not, we are slightly different, it's pretty negligible. Similarly, query 4 and query 7, not showing as much. But, if you look at all the bigger queries where the ability to have much better plans helps more, query 3 through, 16, we see that the query optimizer has provided a much better plan and therefore much better performance overall. So this is just an example. It shows a plan on the left side where, run stats gives us some estimate of what rows will come out of a table scan based on the filtering. And you can see that the actual actuals versus planned is quite off. And because of that, you get a specific join order, which then gives you a certain performance characteristics. On the right side, though, we can see that the model did a much better job of predicting the cardinality coming out of that table scan. And because of that, you get a much better plan above it through the joins because it's projecting the number of rows much more accurately. And that's really what the right-hand box is trying to show is that, in a given data set that we had, the model was able to predict almost zero, which is really where you want to be, what the statistics are for that table. Column group stats, improved things quite a bit. They got us into a much narrower range of error versus just pure, run stats that we would normally collect as well. So mostly the AI optimizer is really about cardinality right now, and how we can use that models to do better prediction of the statistics. We are looking at how we can extend those models into, cardinality across joins and some other complex operations, which we wouldn't be able to achieve, even with column group stats or regular run stats. So as D12 evolves, we should be able to improve even other areas through the AI optimizer. So security. Because it's a major release, we can make some changes that are harder to do in the mod packs. And we continue to try and make Db2 secure, as that is something that we all face in all of our organizations, needing to be, more and more stringent on security. So one of the things we've done is change a bunch of behaviors. In the past, if you granted someone DB we gave you data access by default. That's probably not the best decision because a DB maybe shouldn't have access to the data. So by default now, if you grant DB you will not get data access unless you explicitly say it. So if you grant DB with data access, you can get it, but the default now is no data access or not with data access. I'm not sure exactly which the terminology is, but be aware of that because now if you're granting new DB you may need to add extra clauses if you need to get the same capabilities as you had by default before. Any DB atom that pre-exists, we do not remove it during upgrade. So, we're not taking away authorities on upgrade. It's just that now if you issue the grant statement without the clause, you will no longer get the extra privileges that we did in the past. Similarly, if you create a new database, a number of objects like connect and implicit schema were granted to public. Again, probably not the best choice in today's world. And so we've stopped doing that. So just be aware that if you create a new database, you may have to go and grant some additional privileges in order to get back to what was there previously. Obviously, again, not taking anything away during upgrade, but change for new databases. The other change is hostname validation, something we delivered in the 11.5 stream, has been turned on by default. So this is a client-side configuration where the client will validate the SSL certificates actually match where they're trying to connect to. So if your certificates don't have the right host names in them, it will fail. You can turn it back off if you need to, but just be aware that this is a 12.1 client-side change, so it will impact default change regardless of whether you're connecting to 12.1 or 11.5 databases. They will now do hostname validation by default. We also extended the trusted context to be able to create, establish that trust relationship based on a stored procedure versus just, sort of static IP addresses. And so you can now have much more control of how you determine whether or not a app server and database can trust each other. We also added in this notion of an app token, which allows the client to send over a unique identifier to help the procedure make that decision. And so therefore you can just have more granularity in establishing trusted contexts in today's sort of more dynamic world where IP addresses are probably not as easy to control. One of the other things we did is once you have this trusted context, you can now exclude that trusted context from auditing if you want. If you have a trusted app server, which maybe is doing auditing on the app server side, maybe you don't need all of that repeated auditing occurring in the database, and that just gives you a way to filter out, some auditing data that can be quite burdensome at times, like could create a lot of data, but still get all of sort of those ad hoc connections coming in fully audited. So you don't have to turn off auditing as a whole. You can now limit what auditing is occurring and make sure that you're capturing audit records for those connections that really matter. Some improvements around RCAC. We know that in the past we maybe struggled with some update and upgrade capabilities around RCAC when they had dependencies on system objects. So we did work to make sure that that is smoother in V12 and will be as we move through the ModPack updates as well. All right, other security enhancements is really around TLS. We moved to TLS 1.3. We now treat TLS plus further auth as being equivalent to, if you specified server encrypt, because we have encrypted it with TLS. This is just an easy way for people to transition to using TLS without having to reconfigure everything, even if server encrypt isn't necessarily being leveraged. Some changes around FIPS behaviors. So the GSKit, introduced even greater FIPS compliance, and so we now have a strict FIPS mode as well as a sort of best effort FIPS mode, I guess, available. So, depending on what your security requirements and needs are. In strict FIP mode, some things like server encrypt won't work because the keys that they need are just not FIPS compliant anymore, and therefore you need to fall back. And that is one of the reasons we did that TLS plus server work, is it allows you to sort of get back if you need to have FIPS mode maybe on a client. You can use TLS and server, and even if it says server encrypted server, we'll still allow it to come in because we know everything's encrypted. Discontinued a number of unsecure encryption things like TLS 1.10 and 1.1. Triple DES will no longer be supported from a new database or new backup perspective. Any existing databases or backups will continue to work. It's just that if you have one and you try to back it up, you will be forced to back it up in EAS. And if you try to restore a backup that's triple DES or AES, you will have to restore it into a AES database. You can't recreate that triple DES database anymore. Data encryption option, which was sort of our precursor to TLS support, is now removed. Use TLS. It's much more secure and uses better algorithms than the data encrypted did. And we removed a few of the unsecure sort of authentication mechanisms like client authentication and fed no auth to try and make sure that we're secure and people can't accidentally misconfigure Db2 to be insecure. Number of Columnar improvements in 12.1. So a number of things that we delivered across the 11.5 stream for our Db2 warehouse product, but we're off by default in sort of more traditional install environments because of fallback are now all enabled. So you get all of the insert and compression work by default in 12.1 enabled. So page compression improvements, trickle insert, as well as the deferred synopsis. I talked about schema evolution being sort of an important theme for V12 as we try to get columnar tables up to be on par as best we can with row tables. So drop and rename is where we started. You'll see some of the data type work coming in through the mod packs. And one of the good benefits, as I mentioned before, is that a move table can now leverage some of these enhancements that we're doing to be much more efficient for columnar tables. We finished off the compact varchar work, and we'll just talk a little bit about that in a second. But I'll skip here to the columnar improvements work. So one of the big things we did at the tail end of 11.5 is the trickle feed insert work, which is really the ability to take single row or small number of rows in a transaction and bring up the performance of columnar to be closer to what you had with row tables. And we did this by really leveraging a concept we always had, which is this concept of column groups. So when we write data out in columnar form, we actually put them in column groups. Usually there's one column in a column group, and then that one column group is on a page. What we really can do is there's really no need in those column groups can be packed actually onto the same page. They're really, the splitting them onto other pages is for the columnar improvements you get on scan. And so what we did is we packed more column groups onto the single page. Maybe a row of a table will still span multiple pages if it's wide. That's still possible. But now you get basically a columnar form, but in less pages, and therefore you don't take the overhead that you would normally get on insert. But what we do is we only keep these column group pages, as we call them, around for a certain number of pages. So you get a certain amount of data, and then we will automatically split it in the background into full column group form where you have a column group on each page. And now your table gets back into the optimized columnar form. And so over time, your table is, for the most part in columnar form, and a few pages maybe in this less optimal form, but it doesn't make as much impact because it's at the tail end of the table. The big advantage of this too is now you get all the benefits of bulk processing around how we do encoding and page compression when we split the groups. So you also get much better long-term compression applied, as well as synopsis capabilities, even though the data originally came in a more trickle format. So compact varchar. So when we originally designed blue varchars on disk were, as you would expect, the length and data. But when we brought them into memory for different reasons, we may have expanded out the amount of memory footprint a varchar took. Sometimes we use column definitions to try and size the memory we required. And this just wasn't an efficient use of memory. In really heavy systems, it could lead to 955s out of memory conditions. And so what we worked on in 11.5 is to really reduce where we had this over consumption of memory. We did it for vectors and work units, group by, and aggregation, but we didn't get to the M-to-N joins work. And with V12, that work is now available. So this really just means that when we have hash joins, we're doing a much better job of keeping the payloads into the memory they really require. We've also extended this to other variable types like bar graphic, bar binary, and the lob descriptors, not the lob data itself, but the descriptors. And what you can see with this improvement is that in many cases we can see, 2 times or greater improvements. Individual queries we saw even up to 60 times. And a lot of this is just that by using the memory more efficiently, we do a lot less spilling, and doing a lot less spilling means a lot less I/O, and therefore much greater performance. Using less memory also means more throughput, because now more queries can run in parallel as well. So one of the big advantages for columnar work in V12. We recognize that upgrade processing is a downtime, and downtimes are becoming harder and harder to get. And so one of the things we did in V12 is look to how we can at least provide some availability through that upgrade process as we work towards fully online upgrades. And so what we did with the HADR reads on standby is we said, well, why can't we leave the standby up and read on standby mode while the upgrade is being applied on the primary, and still allow them to reintegrate after the other side has been upgraded. And so that is the work we did. So this at least gives you the ability to have some access through read on standby, so readability of the data during that upgrade. To take advantage of this, you will need to be on a specific 11.5 CSV. The docs explain which KI you need for that. That's just because we need to do a little bit of changes in 11.5 in order for that peer state to be maintained. There's a documented process for how you achieve this, just like we documented how you can use HADR to do updates. So there's different ways you can go through the upgrade process in an HADR environment, and one of them now is how to use read on standbys to provide some availability. So a good feature and gets us a little bit higher availability during those upgrades. So backup performance. So inter-tablespace parallelism on by default. And this chart is really just to show that if you have I/O available, so one of the key things to benefit from this work is that you need to have CPU obviously available, but you also have to have I/O bandwidth both on, the database itself where we're reading from, but also have I/O space available on the backup target, so that those aren't the bottlenecks. But assuming they're not the bottlenecks and you have additional CPU that before we weren't leveraging, this can show that, in a 1 container scenario, we saw 2 times faster performance. Obviously, as you have containers and they become more balanced, the benefit decreases. But what the right-hand side is showing is that when you had things really balanced out to be as efficient as possible, even though we're now applying this new interparallelism algorithm, we don't see regression. So we still do a proper job of parallelizing things across both balanced and unbalanced configurations to get the best we can out of the backup system. This slide is just a little bit skewed. That just shows that we increased the number of fiber channel cards we had available to us to create even more I/O capacity on the same system, and we were able to even get a 4x time improvement. And again, performance moves off as things balance out, but we don't regress even in the cases where things are balanced. Things to be aware. So Pacemaker, as we talked about, is now the integrated cluster manager on Linux. AX remains TSA. Well, the other thing we're changing is no longer are we carrying around all the legacy ICU. This is the module used for Unicode collation and Unicode support, because we just can't afford to have all of the old code that has security issues and other challenges of it carrying it forward. So with V12, we're going to have 1 version of ICU. We will update that in mod packs if we require. And that means that, things like collations can change if the languages have decided to change how collation works through those ICU versions. This does mean that there is a few collations that we know are impacted from basically from a long time ago. that we basically carried forward. There aren't many customers using them, so it's, most folks will not be impacted at all by this, but just be aware if you're using some of those really old collations. We will map them to new collations, but there are possibilities that if you had indexes built on top of that collated data, those indexes will need to be rebuilt during upgrade. And check upgrade will tell you all that as it goes through the database. Most customers won't be impacted, but going forward, keep that in mind. If you're adding in new collation stuff, you probably want to make sure that you're not trying dependencies on fixed entities on top of those collated data. Try to use it only in the places where it makes sense. All right, so mod packs. The plan right now is to deliver a mod pack in February, so that is on track. That's what's green. So 12.1.1 should come out February 5th. And then we're looking to maybe deliver a mod pack in June, and then we're trying to sneak one in October. We're trying to bring it back from sort of our historical November release in order to get in before some of the lockdowns that occur around Black Friday. So that is the current plan of record. 12.1.2 and 12.1.3, of course, could change. Dates could move because those are not fully committed. But February 5th, you should be expecting, the 12.1.1, which will catch up all of those things we talked about being missing on the operating system side as we get those dependencies come out. So candidates. So yeah, 12.1.1, these things will come. SVM uplift gets you pureScale support. Will get us a preview of MVME reservation support in AWS. The GA of that will actually come with 12.1.2, but the SVM work that we needed to do has occurred in 12.1.1. We just need to get some extra validation through the 12.1.2, but it allows us to get the EAPs out to provide access to that in AWS. On the line index reorg for pureScale, I said it flipped. It will come in 12.1.1. There's some additional explain information available for the AI optimizer. Just makes it easier for you to see where the AI optimizer kicked in and how it helped, or that it was used. Columnar tables, we're looking to do performance improvements around first fetch end rows, as well as some explain enhancements around section actuals. So section actuals is now available for columnar tables. And this will just continue that work. There are cases where, the section actuals don't map exactly to our plan, so there are some nuances in columnar, and this is just some work to sort of highlight those things. One of the things we did, and I think I forgot to mention, is we created the ability for DB atoms to basically create tablespace and buffer pools in databases with automatic storage. So if the sysatom provides the database with some storage paths that are configured for automatic, there's really no reason why the DB atom can't go and use those table spaces that are create table spaces and buffer pools over top of those automatic storage paths, because the sysatom's already provided in the database. In 12.1.1, we're going to extend that further by having an actual table space atom authority that can be leveraged then to be delegated who creates buffer pools and table spaces. Now, as we look to 12.1.2 and 12.1.2 further, these are just thoughts. So, 12.1.2 a little bit harder, plans, but 12.1 beyond 12.1.2, planning is subject to change because it's what we're thinking, but staffing and other things will change things. But in 12.1.2, vector similarity search is something we're really trying to get out. The ability for Db2 to have a vector type, as well as scalar functions to allow us to do similarity search. And then over the life of V12, we'll improve on how efficient those similarity searches are. This is the first step to get some basic infrastructure around vector support in place. pureScale EFA work will come out. So this is the ability to do Amazon's variation of RDMA, so it allows us to do higher write workloads in an AWS environment. Schema evolution will continue. We're looking at decimal precision in 12.1.2. And we're also going to tackle the world writable file challenge that we had, which is really due to the fact that we have an embedded client within all of our servers. And so that client and the server need to share some files. And obviously the clients can be used by anyone. So therefore, some of the files we create as world writable. This is just going to be an optional way for customers during install and upgrade and update to provide a group that should own these world writable files. We will then make the group the owner of the files instead of world writable, and then it's up to the system administrators to make sure whoever needs access to the clients are in the correct groups for accessing those files. Data mask at read, so this is just an extension of our data masking capability that currently works sort of at result to make sure that we mask earlier in the process if that's something you require. It'll be optional on the data masking, but provides extensions for how RCAC works. We talked about how we're looking at other hyperscalers, so one of the things we're also doing is extending the remote storage work to support Azure blob storage. So this just gives you that capability in all of the interfaces that use remote storage aliases to work and interact with Azure. Now, if we look further out, we understand reorg challenges is something a lot of customers are facing. So we're looking at how we do a number of reorg enhancements. The current thinking is we're going to look at online reorg with global indexes. We seem to think that may be one of the bigger pain points. Looking at continuing the pureScale topology changes work. So this is work that we're doing around allowing topology changes to be less impactful to pureScale in GA. Backups no longer, drop member no longer forces you into a backup pending state. And we will continue that work, trying to get to the point where we can do online drop member in pureScale. The remote tablespace work, which is the ability to put columnar tables out into object storage, we're looking to bring that to PowerPC Little Indian environments, looking to externalize it so it can be run outside of the container, so taking away some of the hooks or providing means to provide the same hooks that right now the container is providing for installers and customization. And of course, we continue to look at performance enhancements that we can do, as well as look at what gaps we can remove from that work. So one last thing before I go to my last thing. We did some work with 12.1 to understand how Db2 12 scales versus Postgres. And so we ran Db2 and Postgres on the same servers. And what we found is Db2 is about 2 times faster on the 4x large system. But the interesting thing more is that as we used bigger systems, Db2 naturally scaled with the available resources, so we became 2.74 times faster and then up to 5 times faster. But Postgres really didn't seem to scale with the hardware. So this is just showing that Db2 is capable of leveraging hardware available more efficiently than Postgres in our testing. And that is it. Any questions?
I don't see any questions in the chat. Yeah, I think it was a
okay.
Oh, sorry, I was stuck on mute. Thanks, Mike, for a great presentation. It was wonderful. I don't see any questions here, but if there are any questions, we'll consolidate everything and then send you an email. We can put that back in our blog.
Yeah, and my email's there. People can reach out if they have questions.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. Today's show sponsor was DBI, DBI software, delivering performance products, right, for database like Db2 and SQL Server. The new feature with the DBI product, it's a thin client rather than a thick client like earlier, so it gives you a complete dashboard for Db2. This is the Db2 dashboard for performance. It gives you history, and then it gives you a lot of dashboards with worst performing, best performing SQLs, the transaction throughput, right? All of the sort of information is going to be displayed in one screen. Okay. With that, we're gonna close today's call. Thanks everybody for attending, and then thanks for joining.